the sunrise. It is a small glass rectangle sitting a few inches from your pillow, and the moment you touch it, it will start talking. It will tell you what happened while you were asleep, who is angry, who needs something, what the world thinks you should be worried about today, and it will do all of this before you have said a single word to yourself. Think about that for a second. Before you have prayed, before you have breathed, before you have even asked yourself how you actually feel this morning, 40, 50, 100 voices have already reached you, and somewhere in the middle of all that noise, your own voice, the one that knows what you truly need today, gets pushed to the back of the line. Have you ever noticed that? You wake up, and within 90 seconds, you are no longer the first person to speak to you. The world is. My dear friend, I want to ask you something honest, something you do not have to answer out loud. When was the last time you woke up, and the very first thing you did was nothing at all? Not check a message, not glance at the clock and calculate how late you already are, not run through the list of everything waiting for you today. Just nothing. A few minutes of simply being awake, without immediately becoming useful to someone else. If you cannot remember the last time that happened, you are not alone. Most adults I have spoken to cannot remember either, and that is exactly why we are here today. I want you to picture your own bedroom tomorrow morning. The curtains letting in that first grey light, the sound of the world slowly waking up outside your window, and somewhere in that quiet room, a version of you lying there, eyes just opening, still half inside a dream, still innocent of everything the day is about to demand. For 1 or 2 seconds, before memory fully returns, you are simply a person, breathing, alive, untouched by deadlines or arguments or bills. And then, almost violently, the day rushes in. Your name, your responsibilities, your worries, all of it arrives at once, like a crowd pushing through a door the instant it opens. Have you ever wondered what it would feel like to hold that door closed for just a few more minutes, on purpose? Most of us never even realize we have the choice. We assume the rush is mandatory, that responsibility means immediate response, that being a good parent, a good employee, a good spouse, a good provider, means surrendering those first fragile moments of the day, the instant our eyes open. So we hand them over, morning after morning, year after year, without ever asking whether they were ours to give away in the first place. Because I want to tell you something that might sound strange at first. The most important part of your morning might not be what you do. It might be what you refuse to do, for just a few minutes, before the day begins asking things of you. We have been taught, especially those of us who have spent years building a career, raising a family, running a household, or carrying responsibility on our shoulders, that a good morning is a busy morning. Wake up early, move fast, check everything, answer everyone, get ahead of the day before it gets ahead of you. And there is nothing wrong with discipline. There is nothing wrong with working hard. But somewhere along the way, many of us confused motion with meaning. We confused a full inbox with a full life. So today, I want to talk to you about something quieter than hustle, but I promise you, it is far more powerful. I want to talk to you about morning silence and why protecting it might be one of the most important decisions you make, not just for tomorrow, but for the rest of your life. Let me start by describing a man I will call Rakesh. Rakesh is 52 years old. He runs a small but successful business, the kind he built with his own hands over almost 20 years. He wakes up at 5:30 every morning, and within the first 60 seconds, before his feet have even touched the floor, his phone is already in his palm. Overnight orders, a supplier complaint, a message from his accountant, a missed call from his son, who is now grown and living in another city, that he will call back later, though later rarely comes. By the time Rakesh gets out of bed, his heart rate has already climbed, his jaw is already tight. And he has not even brushed his teeth yet. He walks into his day already behind, already reacting, already carrying the weight of other people's urgency as if it were his own. He tells himself this is simply what responsible people do. But here is what he never noticed, because none of us notice it easily. He has not spoken to himself in years. Not really. He has managed his business beautifully. He has managed his own inner world. Barely at all. Does any part of that sound familiar to you? Maybe not the business, maybe not the exact details, but the feeling. The feeling of becoming a reaction machine before you have even had the chance to become a person again after a night of sleep. Here is something worth sitting with. Your mind, while you sleep, is remarkably quiet compared to how it will be in an hour from waking. Sleep is one of the only times your brain is not performing for anyone, not solving anything, not proving anything, and then the alarm rings, and within moments, we flood that clean, quiet space with information, obligation, and other people's emotions. We do this so quickly, so automatically, that we no longer even question it. But here is the question worth asking. If the first voice you hear every single day belongs to the news, to your notifications, to your inbox, to social media, then whose life are you actually starting your morning inside of? Yours or everyone else's? What if the most powerful part of your morning is the part where you do absolutely nothing at all? I know that might sound almost irresponsible to some of you, especially if you were raised, like many of us were, to believe that stillness is laziness and busyness is virtue. I want to gently challenge that belief today, because I do not think it is true, and I think deep down, you already suspect it is not true either. Let us talk about the difference between being busy and being purposeful, because these two things get confused constantly, and the confusion is costing people their peace. Being busy means your calendar is full. Being purposeful means your choices are aligned with who you actually want to be. You can be incredibly busy your entire life and still feel, at the end of it, that you never truly lived on your own terms. You simply responded and responded and responded until responding became your whole identity. I met a woman once, I will call her Meena, who was 61 years old, recently retired after almost 30 years as a school teacher. For 30 years, her mornings had a rhythm dictated entirely by bells, schedules, and the needs of other people's children. When she retired, she expected relief. Instead, she found something unexpected. She found emptiness where her identity used to be. Meena told me that in her working years, she used to wake up and immediately start planning her students' day. Then, once retired, she woke up and did not know what to do with the quiet. So she filled it. She filled it with television, with errands, with phone calls, with anything that resembled the busyness she was used to, because the silence itself felt unfamiliar, almost uncomfortable. It took her nearly a year to realize something important. She had spent 3 decades so devoted to being useful to others that she had never learned how to simply sit with herself. Her stillness felt like a stranger, because she had never properly introduced herself to it. My dear friend, if silence feels uncomfortable to you, that discomfort is not a warning sign. It is simply evidence of how long it has been since you sat with your own thoughts without an agenda. This is where I want to introduce something I consider one of the most important distinctions of this entire conversation. There is a very real difference between morning hustle and morning silence. And it is not about which one is good and which one is bad. Both matter, but they ask completely different questions. Morning hustle asks, what can I accomplish today? Morning silence asks, who do I want to be today? Read that again slowly, in your mind. What can I accomplish versus who do I want to be? One is about output, the other is about identity. And here is the truth that took me years to understand myself. When you begin your day only with the first question, you may accomplish a great deal and still feel completely lost inside your own life. But when you begin even briefly with the second question, everything you accomplish afterward tends to feel more aligned, more meaningful, and far less exhausting. This is not a rejection of ambition. Please hear me clearly on this. I am not telling you to stop working hard. I am not telling you to abandon your goals, your responsibilities, or your drive. Ambition is a beautiful thing when it is guided by clarity. The problem is not ambition. The problem is ambition without awareness. The problem is running fast in a direction you never actually chose, simply because everyone around you is running too. Let me tell you about a man named Suresh, 64 years old, only a few years from retirement, who spent most of his life being the reliable one, the one who took care of his aging parents, the one who supported his younger siblings financially, the one who made sure his own children never lacked anything, even when it meant he quietly went without. Suresh once told me something that stayed with me for a long time. He said, "I have spent my whole life making sure everyone else's morning goes smoothly. I never once asked how I wanted my own morning to feel." There was no anger in his voice when he said it. Just a quiet kind of sadness, the sadness of a good man who gave so much of himself to others that he genuinely forgot he was allowed to have needs too. I want to say something to every one of you listening who has spent years, maybe decades, being the strong one, the dependable one, the person everyone else leans on. Protecting a few quiet minutes for yourself in the morning is not selfishness. It is not abandoning your responsibilities. It is actually what allows you to carry those responsibilities without slowly breaking under their weight. You cannot pour steady strength into your family, your work, and your community from a well that you never allow to refill. Now, let us go a little deeper, because I do not want this to only be a conversation about phones and notifications. This is a conversation about something bigger than technology. It is a conversation about identity, attention, and where we place our sense of self each morning. Here is what happens when we immediately consume the outside world upon waking. We begin, without realizing it, to measure our own life against everyone else's highlights. We see someone's vacation, someone's promotion, someone's seemingly perfect family photo, and within seconds, some quiet part of us starts comparing, starts questioning, starts wondering if we are somehow behind in a race we never consciously agreed to enter. We also, often within the very first few minutes of consciousness, absorb bad news, tragic news, frightening news, none of which we can do anything about at 6 in the morning, and yet we carry the emotional weight of it into our meetings, our conversations, our relationships, throughout the entire day. And separately from all of that, we often wake up already replaying yesterday, an argument with a spouse, a tense conversation with a colleague, a mistake we made that is still echoing in our mind. Before the new day has even properly begun, we have already dragged yesterday's weight into it. Here is the deeper truth I want to offer you. Silence does not remove these things from existing. The bad news is still real. The argument still happened. The bills still need to be paid. Silence does not erase your problems, but it changes your relationship to them. There is a profound difference between reacting to your problems and responding to them. Reaction is immediate, emotional, and often driven by whatever thought arrived first, uninvited. Response is intentional. It comes from a place of having taken a breath, having created a small gap between the stimulus and your action. Silence is what creates that gap. Have you ever noticed how the wisest people you know, the ones who seem to handle pressure with a certain calm dignity, rarely seem to be the loudest or the most frantic in a crisis? It is not that they feel less, it is that somewhere along the way, they built the habit of pausing before responding. That pause is not weakness, that pause is mastery. And that pause, my dear friend, is far easier to access during the day if you have practiced it quietly each morning. Let me take this one step further, because there is something even deeper hiding underneath all of this. Silence helps us separate our problems from our identity. What do I mean by that? Many adults, especially those carrying significant responsibility, begin to unconsciously define themselves by their struggles. I am a person drowning in debt. I am a person whose marriage is strained. I am a person who is exhausted and overworked. Notice how these statements are not simply describing a circumstance, they are describing an identity. But here is the truth. You are not your debt. You are a person who is currently experiencing a financial challenge. You are not your exhaustion. You are a person who is currently carrying a heavy season of life. This distinction may sound small, but it changes everything about how you move through your day. Silence gives us the space to remember that we are the observer of our circumstances, not merely the sum of them. When the mind is constantly flooded with input from the moment we wake, we rarely get the chance to notice this distinction. We simply become whatever the noise tells us we are. I once spoke with a business owner named Farhan, 49 years old, who had just been through a difficult financial year. Late payments from clients, rising costs, sleepless nights. He told me that for months, every morning felt the same. He would wake up, and within seconds, his mind would already be calculating numbers, imagining worst-case scenarios, feeling the tightness of fear before his feet had even touched the floor. Then, almost by accident, during a period when his internet was down for several days, he found himself sitting quietly with a cup of tea each morning, simply because there was nothing else immediately available to distract him. At first it felt strange. Then, slowly he began to notice something. In that quiet space, he was not just a man drowning in financial pressure. He was a father, a husband, a man who still loved music, who still remembered how to laugh, who still had dreams beyond his balance sheet. He told me later, those few accidental quiet mornings did not fix his business, but they reminded him that he still existed underneath the crisis, and somehow that made the crisis easier to face. He said something I will never forget. He said, "I did not need the noise to stop because my problems disappeared. I needed the noise to stop so I could remember who was solving them." Now let us talk about something many people overlook entirely when discussing morning routines: relationships. How you begin your morning quietly shapes how you show up for the people you love throughout the day. If you wake up already tense, already reactive, already carrying the emotional residue of unread messages and unresolved stress, that tension does not simply disappear when you sit down for breakfast with your family. It leaks out, in your tone, in your patience, or lack of it, in how quickly you become irritated by small things that on a calmer day would not have bothered you at all. I think of a woman named Priya, 55 years old, married for almost 30 years, who once admitted to me that some of her worst arguments with her husband happened not because of anything he did that morning, but because she had already absorbed frustration from an email before she had even said good morning to him. She was reacting to her inbox, but he was receiving the reaction. This happens more than we realize. We bring the emotional debris of the outside world into the most intimate relationships of our lives, simply because we never gave ourselves a buffer between waking up and engaging with others. Silence creates that buffer. A few quiet minutes before you speak to anyone allows you to arrive at your relationships as yourself, rather than as an extension of whatever stress just entered your mind through a screen. Imagine, just for a moment, greeting the people you love most, not with residual tension from a stranger's message, but with the calm, grounded version of yourself. That is not a fantasy, my dear friend. That is available to you tomorrow morning, if you choose it. Let us also talk gently about something deeply personal: faith, gratitude, and the spiritual dimension of silence. I want to be respectful here, because I know each of you may come from a different background, a different belief system, a different relationship with spirituality altogether. Some of you pray, some of you meditate, some of you simply try to feel a sense of connection to something larger than your daily to-do list. Whatever that looks like for you, silence is often the doorway to it. Silence can become its own form of prayer, even without words. Sitting quietly, breathing, acknowledging that you exist within something larger than your immediate problems, can create a kind of peace that busyness simply cannot manufacture. Gratitude, too, tends to arrive more naturally in stillness. It is very difficult to feel truly grateful while simultaneously scrolling through 15 unread messages. Gratitude requires a small amount of space to breathe in, and mornings filled instantly with noise rarely leave that space available. I remember an elderly man, 71 years old, who told me that every single morning of his adult life, before anything else, he simply sat by his window for 10 minutes and looked outside. No phone, no conversation, just watching the light change, listening to birds, occasionally saying a quiet thank you for another day of life. He said it was not really about religion, though his faith mattered deeply to him. It was about remembering, every single day, that he had not earned this morning. It had simply been given to him. And that small act of quiet gratitude shaped the tone of his entire day, every day, for decades. You do not need 71 years of life experience to borrow that wisdom today. Now, I want to address something important, because I do not want anyone listening to feel overwhelmed by everything we have discussed so far. You may be thinking, this all sounds meaningful, but my mornings are already so tight. Between getting the children ready, preparing for work, caring for aging parents, managing a household, where exactly am I supposed to find extra time for silence? Here is the good news. This is not about adding an extra hour to your morning. This is not about waking up at 4 in the morning to sit in perfect stillness for 60 minutes, like some idealized version of a monk on a mountain. That is not realistic for most working adults, and frankly, it is not necessary. What I am suggesting is far simpler and far more achievable. Before you reach for your phone tomorrow morning, before you check a single message, give yourself just a few quiet minutes. It does not need to be perfect. It does not need to be complicated. 10 minutes, even 5, if that is truly all you have. Here is a simple way to shape that time. Keep your phone away from your bed, ideally across the room, so reaching for it is not the automatic first motion of your day. When you wake, before speaking to anyone or checking anything, sit up and simply breathe slowly for a few moments. Not forced, dramatic breathing, just slow, natural breaths, in and out, allowing your body to fully arrive in the day. Then, notice your thoughts without immediately chasing them. If a worry appears, acknowledge it gently, the way you might acknowledge a person walking past you on the street, without inviting them to sit down and stay for an hour. Let the thought pass. If it feels natural to you, offer a small moment of gratitude. It can be as simple as being thankful for another day, for your health, for the people in your life, for a roof over your head. Gratitude does not need to be elaborate to be meaningful. If prayer or reflection is part of your life, this is the moment for it. And if it is not, simply ask yourself one honest question. Something like, who do I want to be today? Or, what actually matters most in the next 24 hours? Let the answer come slowly. You do not need to force clarity. Sometimes it arrives on its own, once the noise has quieted down. Finally, decide, even briefly, what deserves your attention today. Not everything that demands your attention deserves it. Some things are urgent but not important. Some things feel loud but are not actually meaningful. A few quiet minutes can help you tell the difference before the day convinces you otherwise. Then, and only then, begin your responsibilities. Check your messages, start your work, care for your family, move through your hustle, but now you are entering it consciously, rather than being pulled into it half asleep. Tomorrow morning, before you give your attention to the world, give a few minutes of it to yourself first. I want to be honest with you about something. This will not feel natural at first. If you have spent years, maybe decades, beginning your day in reaction mode, a few quiet minutes might initially feel uncomfortable, even unproductive. Your mind may resist it. It may tell you that you do not have time for this, that there are more important things to do. That voice is simply habit talking, not truth. Give it a real chance. Not one morning, not out of curiosity to see if it magically transforms your life overnight. Give it a week. Notice, gently, without judgment, how you feel entering your responsibilities after a few quiet minutes, compared to how you feel entering them straight from the noise of notifications. I think of Rakesh again, the business owner I mentioned earlier. Months after our conversation, he told me he had started something small. Before touching his phone each morning, he sat on the edge of his bed for what he called 5 honest minutes. No goal, no agenda, just breathing, and occasionally a quiet thank you for another day. He told me the business challenges did not disappear. The supplier issues still existed. The pressure was still real. But he said something that stayed with me. He said, "I used to start my day feeling like I was already losing. Now I start my day feeling like I at least know who is standing here to face it." That, my dear friend, is the transformation we are really talking about, not the disappearance of your problems. Not a magical life free of pressure or responsibility, but a steadier version of you, walking into that pressure rather than being dragged into it half-formed. Let us talk, for a moment, about the difference between being alone and being lonely, because I think this distinction matters deeply here. Many adults avoid silence because somewhere along the way, silence became associated with loneliness, with emptiness, with something to be feared rather than welcomed. But being alone with your own thoughts, even briefly, is not the same as being lonely. Loneliness is the ache of feeling disconnected from others, or even from yourself. Solitude, real solitude, chosen and intentional, can actually be one of the most connecting experiences available to us, because it reconnects us to the one relationship we often neglect the most, our relationship with ourselves. You cannot show up fully for your spouse, your children, your friends, your work, if you have quietly lost touch with yourself underneath all of the roles you play. Morning silence is not an escape from those roles. It is what allows you to inhabit them more fully, more peacefully, more genuinely. I also want to gently address something about aging and time, because many of you listening are not in your 20s anymore, chasing an endless horizon of years ahead. Some of you are thinking, quietly, about how much time may actually be left, about aging parents, about your own mortality, about regret. Silence has a particular gift for those of us in this stage of life. It allows us to ask deeper questions than simply what is on today's schedule. It allows us to ask, am I living in alignment with what actually matters to me? Am I present for the people I love, or merely physically nearby while mentally elsewhere? Am I spending my remaining years the way I truly want to, or simply the way momentum has carried me? These are not comfortable questions to rush through in the middle of a chaotic morning. They require space, they require quiet, and frankly, my dear friend, they deserve a few honest minutes of your attention, because the years, as many of you already know far better than I do, move faster than we expect. Isn't it strange how we protect our calendars so carefully, yet rarely protect the first few minutes of our own consciousness? I want to return now to something I mentioned earlier, the idea that hustle without inner clarity can become noise. I want to unpack that a little further, because I think it is one of the most important ideas in this entire conversation. Noise is not always loud in the traditional sense. Noise can look like a perfectly organized calendar filled with meetings that do not actually move you toward anything meaningful. Noise can look like constant achievement that never quite satisfies, because you never paused long enough to ask whether the achievement was even something you truly wanted or simply something you were expected to want. Productivity without direction can become exhaustion, precisely because you are expending enormous energy without the clarity to know if that energy is even pointed somewhere worthwhile. This is why some of the busiest people you know can also seem, underneath the surface, some of the most tired, unfulfilled people you know. They are moving constantly, but not necessarily moving toward anything that actually matters to them. Silence interrupts that pattern. Even a few minutes of it each morning acts like a compass check. It does not do the walking for you. You still have to walk, still have to work, still have to show up and put in the effort. but it makes sure that effort is pointed in a direction that will actually mean something to you when you look back on it. Let me offer one more story before we bring this all together, because I think it captures something important about what happens when this shift truly takes root. There was a woman named Anjali, 58 years old, whose children had recently moved out to build their own lives. For nearly 3 decades, her mornings had been built entirely around other people, packing lunches, managing schedules, making sure everyone else's day started smoothly. When her home became quieter, she did not know what to do with herself. The silence, at first, felt like grief, a reminder of a role that had defined her for so long. But over time, almost accidentally, she began sitting with a cup of tea each morning before doing anything else. At first it felt hollow, then slowly, something shifted. She began to notice thoughts and feelings she had not had time to notice in 30 years. She began remembering things she used to enjoy before her life became entirely about caretaking. Small things, drawing, listening to a particular kind of music, simply sitting outside and noticing the sky. She told me months later that those quiet mornings did not replace her love for her children. Nothing could. But they helped her rediscover that she was also a whole person, separate from that role, someone with her own inner world worth returning to. She said something beautifully simple. She said, "I spent 30 years waking everyone else up gently. It took me this long to learn how to wake myself up gently too." There is one more story I want to share with you, because I think it touches something many of you are living through right now, even if you have never said it out loud. I think of a man named Vikram, 46 years old, who found himself, almost overnight, caring for his elderly mother after a fall left her unable to manage on her own. Vikram already had a demanding job, 2 teenage children, and a marriage that needed more attention than he was able to give it. Suddenly, his mornings began before sunrise, checking on his mother, arranging her medication, making sure she had eaten, all before he had even had a chance to fully wake up himself. For almost a year, Vikram told me, he did not have a single morning that belonged to him. Every waking moment was immediately claimed by someone else's need. He loved his mother deeply. He did not resent caring for her. But somewhere in the middle of that year, he began to feel like a stranger inside his own life, moving through each day on autopilot, running on a kind of exhaustion that sleep no longer seemed to fix. One morning, almost by accident, he woke up 10 minutes before his mother usually needed him, and instead of immediately springing into action, he simply sat on the edge of his bed. He did not plan it, he was simply too tired to move yet. In that unplanned stillness, he told me, something in his chest loosened, just slightly, for the first time in months. He began doing it deliberately after that. 10 minutes, sometimes less, before the caregiving, before the parenting, before the job. Just sitting, breathing, allowing himself to exist without being needed by anyone for those few minutes. He told me later, those 10 minutes did not lighten his responsibilities. He still cared for his mother. He still showed up for his children, his job, his marriage. But he said something that has stayed with me. He said, those 10 minutes were the only part of my day that were still mine, and somehow, having that small piece of ownership over my own morning made it possible to give everything else so freely. If you are pouring yourself into everyone around you, and there is nothing left over for yourself by the end of the day, perhaps the solution is not to pour less. Perhaps it is to fill your own cup first, quietly, before anyone else even wakes up. Yeah, I also want to speak, gently, about regret, because I think it belongs in this conversation, even though it is not always comfortable to discuss. Many adults reach a certain stage of life and begin to notice a quiet ache around choices made, or not made, years earlier. Time spent chasing things that did not ultimately matter, relationships neglected in favor of urgent but unimportant tasks, years that moved faster than anyone expected. Silence has an interesting relationship with regret. When we avoid stillness, we often avoid the questions that stillness naturally brings up. Questions about whether we are actually living the life we want, or simply the life that momentum has carried us into. It is easier, in the short term, to stay busy and avoid those questions altogether. But avoided questions do not disappear. They simply wait, quietly, until the moments we can no longer outrun them. A few honest minutes each morning, asking yourself what actually matters today, is a small, gentle way of staying in conversation with your own life, so that years from now, you are less likely to look back and wonder where the time went, and more likely to recognize the shape of a life you actually chose, one quiet morning at a time. There is also something worth saying about boundaries, because morning silence is, in many ways, a boundary. It is a way of saying, gently but firmly, that before I belong to my job, my family, my responsibilities, and the endless demands of the world, I first belong to myself for a few minutes. This is not selfish. A boundary protecting your own well-being is not a wall keeping love out. It is a foundation making sure you have something real left to give. My dear friend, wherever you are in your own life right now, whatever season you are in, whether you are deep in the middle of raising a family, running a business, caring for aging parents, rebuilding after loss, or simply trying to catch your breath in the middle of an overwhelming season, I want you to hear this clearly. You do not need to win the morning. You need to enter the morning consciously. You do not need to accomplish everything before breakfast. You need to remember who you are before the world starts asking for pieces of you. Tomorrow, when your eyes open, the phone will still be there. The messages will still be waiting. The responsibilities will still exist. The world will not have suddenly become gentler or slower or easier. But something inside you can be different. You can choose, just for a few minutes, to belong to yourself first, before you belong to everyone else's expectations for the day. This is not about rejecting your responsibilities. It is not about escaping your life. It is about entering that life with a calmer mind, a steadier heart, and a clearer sense of who is actually walking through it. What if the most productive thing you do tomorrow morning happens in the first 5 minutes, when you do absolutely nothing at all except breathe and remember yourself? I would love to know what this brought up for you. If you are willing, take a moment after this video ends and think of one single word that describes how you want to begin tomorrow morning. Perhaps it is peace, perhaps it is clarity, perhaps it is gratitude, perhaps it is patience or faith, or simply stillness. Whatever word arrives for you, I invite you to write it down somewhere you will see it tomorrow morning, as a quiet reminder before the noise begins. And if this conversation meant something to you, if even one part of it felt like it was speaking directly to your life, consider staying connected to this channel, so we can continue exploring these kinds of honest, human conversations together. Before I let you go, I want to leave you with one final thought. Silence is not the absence of your life. It is the space where you finally get to hear it clearly. Tomorrow morning, before the world speaks to you, I hope you will take just a few minutes to let yourself speak first. My dear friend, you do not have to earn the right to a peaceful morning. It is already yours. All you have to do is choose it. Sit for a moment, if you can, right now, before you move on to whatever comes next. Let this settle. And when tomorrow comes, and your eyes open to another day full of everything life has placed on your shoulders, remember that just beneath all of that noise, there is still a quiet, steady version of you, waiting patiently to be heard first.